This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that gives you all the tools you need to build a great website, even if you're British, I imagine. I'm back in my girl boss crown from the Cinderella video. It just felt right. I was also going to put all my England merch in the frame and then realized that after 3 years of living there, I still don't really have any, so I just put up this pathetic tableau of all my BFI stuff. So here's the thing. For the last 3 years now, the actor Nicholas Galitzine has, like clockwork, released a different, politically flawed new adult romance movie for me to pick apart on my channel every single summer. First of all, I have to thank him for that. Nick, if you're watching, respectfully, keep 'em coming. I live for this. But second, more importantly, in my last 2 videos in this series of sorts, I really went in hard on these movies. Like, I was ruthless. I really did not like them. And I want to emphasize that this video is not going to be like that. This is a case where I actually think the work in question is pretty good. I just happen to have mainly one big issue with it that I haven't really seen anyone else talk about, so I wanted to share. Originally, I thought I would do a review/breakdown of both the novel Red, White, and Royal Blue and its recent film adaptation. But since then, I've decided to stop covering movies and TV from companies in the AMPTP in solidarity with the current WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike action. So because of that, I decided to just review the book, not touch on the film. But I still felt a little uncomfortable with the idea that even if I stick to the book, discussing said book around this time is inevitably going to draw attention to the movie, right? So I was debating how to handle that. And eventually I realized that maybe instead of ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the movie, I could use the elephant in the room not to promote the film, but to further promote the strikes. After all, the adaptation comes to us from Amazon Studios, the wokest, most equitable, least exploitative— I can't even finish that sentence. So stick around till after the review if you want to hear some info about Amazon's brilliant track record with labor issues and about the Hollywood strikes and how you can help. But in the meantime, my review, all of my analysis, will focus only on the book. At the time of writing and shooting this, I have not seen the movie, and I do not intend to promote it. Let's do this.
We're just normal men.
What do you mean, normal men?
We're just innocent men.
I have a confession to make. I only read Red, White, and Royal Blue because a couple close friends of mine back in London were actually runners, not for the main shoot, but for one of the promo shoots of the film adaptation. I was back in America for the summer, and I remember getting a text from them saying, like, "Jane, we're working a shoot with one of the guys from the Kissing Booth." And naturally, I was very intrigued. I had heard of Red, White, and Royal Blue at the time. I don't read fiction as much as I would like to, and I'm definitely not very involved in popular book circles or whatever, but as a semi-ironic lover of cheesy YA and new adult romance, I tend to be at least aware of the releases that get really big. And Red, White, and Royal Blue was big. It was a New York Times bestseller, I believe it won some awards, and my impression is that it also fostered a pretty large fan base, which makes sense to me. The style of the book really has that 2010s fandom culture appeal, which I'll talk a little more about later. If you don't know, Red, White, and Royal Blue is a novel by Casey McQuiston. It chronicles a forbidden romance between the first son of the United States, Alex Claremont Diaz, and the Prince of England, Henry bunch of last names. You know how these royals are. This is all set in a quasi-alternate universe in the sense that this US president is a fictional president, and this generation of the British monarchy is full of fictional monarchs. It's not about, like, Hunter Biden falling in love with Prince Harry, although that would be awesome. I can see it now. Somebody get on that. Write that fan fiction. Anyway, at the beginning of the story, Alex and Henry are kind of casual rivals. The inciting incident is that they cause a bit of an international upset when their ribbing results in them accidentally tipping over a big cake at a royal wedding and falling into the cake and stuff. It's all a very whimsical political scandal. So Alex's mother, the president, decides to do some damage control by having Alex and Henry essentially stage a close friendship. Their respective teams send them on some PR appearances together to dispel this idea that there's animosity between the presidency and the monarchy. And you can imagine how it shakes out from there. It's the old enemies to lovers, fake friendship to real relationship pipeline. Like I said earlier, I did not hate this book. In fact, I thought much of it was pretty good. Casey McQuiston seems like a good author. The dialogue is good, there's a lot of genuine wit, it's a page-turner, and the romance honestly really worked for me a lot of the time. I'm really not trying to, kick a hornet's nest here. You know, I don't want any fans to click on this and think that it's just going to be me hating on this book unnecessarily or trying to add to any cultural pushback that stuff like this sometimes gets. What I really want to get at in this video is one flaw concerning the entire premise of the story, something that I personally found it kind of hard to get over, and that has to do with the treatment of the political elements in the book. The thing about Red, White, and Royal Blue is that the author made a very deliberate choice to set the story within this highly politically charged setting, and McQuiston did have their reasons for doing that. According to the author, they first had the idea for this book in 2016, when Trump was running for president, this very bleak time for US politics. It seems like they wanted to create a story that took a more hopeful, optimistic approach to the world of government and global politics. And I can definitely understand that impulse. The late 2010s were an extremely depressing time to be an American. It really still is a depressing time now, and escapism is a very natural response. I can respect the desire to try to imagine a better world than this one. But my issue is this. Despite depicting a superficially modern, liberal, inclusive reimagining of both the US government and British monarchy, Red, White, and Royal Blue is inherently not a progressive story, in the sense that it is fundamentally uninterested in the idea of structural change, especially when it comes to the monarchy. I should print that on a t-shirt or something. So what do I mean by all that? Well, from the very beginning, the author depicts the monarchy as an extremely negative force in Henry's life, and in general, a pretty terrible thing to be a part of. Virtually the entire reason Alex and Henry's forbidden romance is forbidden is because they're gay, and you are not allowed to be a gay English monarch, at least not in this book. Of course, it's also because both Alex and Henry come from such politically important families, and any relationship involving two high-profile political figures from separate nations is going to have political ramifications, but the bigger reason is definitely that they're both men. And the whole thing is depicted as being a much bigger problem on Henry's part. There's still pressure on Alex in the book because there's some worry that him coming out could affect his mom's electability, but he is still allowed to be bisexual. Whereas for Henry, when he's outed as gay, the Queen of England kind of suggests that he should just deny it and marry a woman anyway for the sake of the crown. It's very clear that in his position, he is basically not allowed to be who he is. That's what he's been told all his life and assumed for the entire book. So this whole time, the whole book, I was reading it like, wow, that's really bleak. It sounds like the monarchy is this really repressive, soul-crushing, outdated, obsolete institution. Maybe the book is going to end with Henry abdicating or somehow otherwise abandoning this system. Maybe he will recognize that in addition to the British monarchy being responsible for countless atrocities all over the world, and no longer even really contributing meaningfully to English governance or culture, it also treats its own members with callous, invasive cruelty, and maybe shouldn't exist at all anymore. But, spoiler alert, he doesn't. No, this is all resolved with Henry's mother, the princess, essentially giving the queen a stern talking to about how the world is changing and she'll just have to accept it. And that works, and Henry's allowed to be gay and be in the monarchy now. So that's it. Henry continues to be a prince. He stays. Cool. There's actually only one mention of abdication in the entire book. It's this, in retrospect, very strange moment when Henry threatens to do that to his brother Philip. He says, "We have a great uncle who abdicated because he was a fucking Nazi, so it'd hardly be the worst reason anyone's done it, would it?" And then Henry gives this whole speech about how the monarchy sucks, questioning what they're even defending, saying he's had enough, he doesn't care about his legacy. But this doesn't end up meaning anything or going anywhere, because in the end, Henry stays the prince. He remains within this horrible system that is the monarchy. Let me tell you about a part of it that I think really illustrates the problem here. Throughout the book, whenever we hear things about Henry's life growing up in the monarchy, or particularly about his older brother Philip, it's always made very clear that the royal duties and traditions are very cold and robotic and repressive and unemotional, and most importantly, that Henry hates all of it. Philip is supposed to be the stuffy, boring prince who's always done everything expected of him and looks down on Henry for not doing the same. He's always telling Henry to start hanging around more respectable people, and similarly we find out that the Queen has been actively telling Henry to ignore his deviant impulses and marry a woman and produce heirs. Whenever Henry has to do something official for the crown, he seems to really resent it, justifiably, especially in relation to his brother. This idea that his entire life, including his romantic relationships, have to be public and official and sanitized really distresses him, again, justifiably. But you know what happens at the end of this book? The last time we see Alex and Henry in England, after they've convinced the Queen to not be at least outwardly homophobic, what are they doing? They're having their royal couple portraits taken. A royal tradition. Something we immediately find out Philip and his wife also did when they were courting. There's a certain need for formal portraits now that Alex is officially in courtship with Henry. He tries not to think too hard about his face on chocolate bars and thongs in Buckingham gift shops. At least it'll be next to Henry's. Yeah, sure, I guess. I couldn't help but read this and think, congratulations, Henry. You have assimilated. The Queen said, okay, fine, you can be gay, but you're still gonna have to do everything else. The camera flashes, and nothing really has to change. Are you starting to see what I'm saying? Isn't it a little strange that with all this talk of not fitting in and daring to be different and brave and forge your own path, all this talk about how thoroughly being raised in this environment fucked Henry up, that when all is said and done, he still just has to sit down and take the royal portrait, sit down and continue the dark legacy of the monarchy. Because what has really changed when Alex and Henry sit down for this portrait? What have they improved about the British monarchy? They've made it a little bit gayer, sure, but it's still the British monarchy. It's like when the military comes out with those recruitment ads that are supposed to be about girl power or LGBT rights or whatever. It's like putting lipstick on a pig. Like, that's great that those soldiers are powerful women, I guess, but it's still the US military. This is made worse by the fact that McQuiston is clearly aware of many of the issues with the monarchy, or at least the popular cultural critiques of it, and clearly wants to have progressive-seeming characters, and thus will have characters straight up deliver little self-aware jabs at it. Listen, Alex tells her, royal weddings are trash, the princes who have royal weddings are trash, the imperialism that allows princes to exist at all is trash, it's trash turtles all the way down. That was actually the crux of the meeting. I've tried to refuse my share of the crown's money. Dad left us each more than enough, and I'd rather cover my own expenses with that than the spoils of, centuries of genocide. Philip thinks I'm being ridiculous. Wow, Henry, that's big of you. I can't believe that instead of relying on your mom's royal family billions, you want to bravely subsist on your dad's movie star millions. He slows and points to a massive piece, a wooden tiger mauling a man dressed as a European soldier, the sign declaring Tipu's tiger. Mom would take us to look at this one and whisper to me, "See how the tiger is eating him up? That's because my great-great-great-great-granddad stole this from India. I think we should give it back, but your gran says no." But because the story ends with no one actually distancing themselves from this institution, all these little moments serve to do is draw attention to the hypocrisy here. It's like, oh, wink wink, we get it, it's bad, but we're not actually gonna do anything about it. That would be too hard. Although it's more pointed when it comes to the monarchy, I do think there's some of this in the depiction of the US government as well. The very best way I can describe it is that this is an Obama-era book if I've ever seen one. And that's the thing. If this had been published in like 2012 or 2013, this would all make a lot more sense. Like, yeah, that's just how it was back then. A lot more people believed in the ultimate goodness of government, even though Obama did not do all good things. Not a lot of people talked about that in the mainstream. In the mainstream, it was like everybody loved him. He was everyone's buddy. I was like 12 in 2013, but this is my impression looking back on that time. It seems like there was this feeling among most middle-class white liberals, and therefore most mainstream media, that things were pretty good for everyone. Obviously, things weren't good for everyone, but in that bubble, that's how it looked. COVID hadn't happened, climate change was a problem, but we were starting to say we would maybe do something about it someday. People still liked Glee, nobody even had Marvel fatigue yet. By 2014, Taylor Swift had released 1989, and it was awesome. Everybody loved it. Nobody thought Taylor Swift, America's sweetheart, would ever have to have a Reputation era. By 2015, we had marriage equality, and Twitter was just a funny place where you could argue over what color the dress was. If you knew Elon Musk's name, you just thought he was like a cool inventor, not a blood money funded right-wing hack fraud grifter. And believe me, 2015 is really when everything changed, because February 2015 marked the release of Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton. I'm going to transition to my ad read right here with that cliffhanger so that you have to keep watching this video if you want to find out what the hell I meant by that. So, it's that time of video again where I tell you all about Squarespace. Squarespace is a website building platform that lets you build a beautiful website on your own terms, just like two children of political leaders building a beautiful romantic relationship together. Kind of. Trying to get your royal family gossip blog off the ground? Not sure why you'd want to do that, but you better believe you can do it on Squarespace. Are you the next girl boss female president looking for a place to sell all your campaign mugs and shirts and pins with your bisexual son's face on them? Print and sell on-demand merch to your heart's content on Squarespace. Need a website to store your 5,000 different alternate universe Hamilton fanfictions? Use Squarespace's intuitive website builder to ensure that you make those founding fathers kiss each other in style. I can't say I've done any of those exact things, but I have used some of those features and found them quite useful. Jokes aside, I just got press accreditation to cover the London Film Festival this fall, which I'm very excited about, so I'm planning to put my blog section to good use posting my reviews and photos and whatnot. And of course, Squarespace is available in both the US and UK, and most other places, so no matter what kind of boyfriend you are, you can access their services. You can always go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and once you have the votes, you can go to squarespace.com/Mulcahy for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You don't actually need votes. That was a little joke about the American electoral process. Thanks, Squarespace, for always letting me be true to myself. Alright, back to the Hamilton thing.
You've got me all wrong. I could go gay like that, sir. You can't just go gay. It's not like buying a ladder.
This is one of my biggest hot takes about American politics. It's not even really a hot take. It's kind of just a neutral thing, I believe. I believe that the musical Hamilton was the last big hurrah of the Obama era. The death rattle. It was the calm before the storm, the culmination of everything the last 7 years had represented, this near blind faith in the American experiment, and in Lin-Manuel Miranda as well. The absolute pinnacle of American liberalism. The system works, people. It works, and the founding fathers that built it were flawed, sure, but they were fundamentally good, complex geniuses who just wanted the best for us, and it's so important that we protect their legacy. And oh my god, Donald Trump is the president. What the fuck? Do you guys remember this tweet? A liberal insurrection would have looked very different. We would have escorted the original Broadway cast of Hamilton into the galleries. They would softly sing, "History has its eyes on you," as members of the GOP spewed their lies. Red, White, and Royal Blue reminds me of this tweet. It's from more recently, and it's probably a joke, but the reason it's funny is that it's so spot on for that cultural moment. It's like the Ruth Conda forever tweet. Yeah, 2015 to 2016 was such a strange time. It was like whiplash. You have all these liberals who have just gotten this huge injection of appreciation and sentimentality for the US government. And then one guy basically reveals that this was a system that could just shatter at any moment. Suddenly it's like maybe checks and balances aren't really real when all the people responsible for doing the checks and balances are insane. It might seem like I'm rambling, but what I'm trying to say is that Red, White, and Royal Blue kind of feels like this remnant of that beautiful little slice of time before things really went to shit, when a lot of people really did have faith that you could fix these systems from the inside. And that sentiment is definitely reflected in Alex's view of government in the book. He wants nothing more than to get into politics like his parents because he really wants to make the world a better place. And similarly to the monarchy stuff, even though he'll give little quippy asides about how he knows how messed up the United States are, he doesn't actually seem particularly interested in improving or changing the systems he wishes to work within. Hilariously, this book is actually peppered with sly Hamilton references. Now, these aren't explicitly Hamilton the musical references, but if you know what to look for, it's very clear that the author was a fan of Hamilton the musical. Alex is canonically named after Alexander Hamilton, for starters, but most revealingly, in one section of the novel, he and Henry start exchanging emails with excerpts from famous love letters, mostly from gay historical figures. Although there's one bizarre instance where Alex uses an excerpt from a love letter sent by Wagner, the composer, which is a strange choice on several levels. Not only was Wagner a raging anti-Semite, but also the letter Alex quotes is not a love letter, but Wagner telling someone about how King Ludwig II, the young homosexual king of Bavaria, was infatuated with Wagner, who himself only feigned interest in the king for his own financial gain. It just seems like a weird departure from all the other gay love letters referenced in the book. Remember when you played Wagner for me? He's an asshole, but this is something. I'll say. I mentioned this to my sister, who's a classical musician, and she was immediately like, why wouldn't they have used Tchaikovsky, who was actually gay and was also known for his piano concertos, which would make it relevant because in the book Henry is a classical pianist. Yes, Tchaikovsky might have been attracted to his own nephew, but in my defense, it seems like it's hard to find a classical composer with 0 skeletons in their closet. Anyway, at one point, Alex quotes an excerpt from one of Alexander Hamilton's letters to John Laurens. If you know, you know. Alex is like, did you know some people think Hamilton might have been bisexual because he had all this emotional correspondence with Laurens? And I don't know about you guys, but this immediately set off alarms in my head. If you're like a history buff and you think otherwise, do correct me if I'm wrong, but it is my impression as a layman that no average person knew about that particular factoid before Hamilton the musical. And specifically the Hamilton the musical fandom. I know I'm kind of revealing things about myself by being able to share this with you. Yeah, I really loved Hamilton when it came out, but I was 14, okay? I had really liked In the Heights. I wasn't super involved in the Hamilton fandom, but I was on Tumblr at the time and I loved Hamilton, so I was kinda in it. I at least bore witness to a lot of the fandom stuff. And let me tell ya, people shipped the guys in Hamilton like crazy. They shipped these guys, these guys, those ones, I think. It was so bizarre, because you suddenly had all these 14-year-old girls writing alternate universe coffee shop fanfiction about the founding fathers, the wig-wearing, never-bathing, slave-owning founding fathers. Hatsune Miku binder Thomas Jefferson. Again, if you know, you know. I'm just saying, for an author like this, who has already shown some Tumblr tendencies based on other things in the novel, to put a reference to Hamilton and Lawrence potentially being in love, I just know Casey was in the Hamilton fandom. I am 100% sure of it. I can't figure out why nobody talks about the possibility of a founding father being not straight. Good news, Alex, they do. Allow me to refer you to a website called tumblr.com. You'll love it. Very enlightening. That was a tangent. But like I said, Red, White, and Royal Blue feels like a relic of the Obama era, which wouldn't be so bad if it were from the Obama era, but this book came out in 2019. There's a sort of datedness, not only to the very 2010s internet-style humor that permeates a lot of the book, but also to this revisionist take on politics in general. As I said earlier, I can totally understand this impulse to respond to the depressing state of US politics post-2016 with optimism, with hope. But my problem is that instead of using that optimism to present truly progressive solutions or the hope of change, the book seems committed to maintaining the status quo. The book ends with Henry assimilating into the royal family that he hates, and Alex deciding to be a politician one day, like his parents, a goal that he had at the beginning of the book and has not changed. They make a big fuss out of how he originally wanted to immediately go into politics and become the youngest senator ever, and now he's going to go to law school and become a civil rights lawyer, and then become a senator a few years down the line. My second time reading the book, I was kind of laughing at this. Throughout the book, Alex has struggled with the idea of whether he's on the right path, doing the right thing. Here's something his sister says to him at one point. Have you ever considered there might be more than one path to use what you have, or to get where you want to be to make the most difference in the world? And by the end of the book, yes, his plan for the next few years has changed, but he's still on the same path. He's still going after the same job. I guess he's just going to try and do some other good stuff first, which is nice, but similarly to Henry's ending, feels kind of empty. This is from the book's acknowledgments. For months after November, I gave up on writing this book. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a tongue-in-cheek parallel universe needed to be an escapist, trauma-soothing, alternate but realistic reality. Not a perfect world, one still unbelievably fucked up, just a little better, a little more optimistic. So I appreciate that McQuiston does acknowledge that they're not trying to depict a perfect version of things, and again, I get that it's escapism, it doesn't have to be perfectly realistic, but this particular type of optimism just feels unhelpful. It feels like it's not presenting any perspective that actually functionally encourages a better future. Also, I can see somebody watching this and thinking, well, it is just a silly new adult romance. Why should Red, White, and Royal Blue have this responsibility to be revolutionary or to inform us about the world? And normally I would agree with you, fictional person, but in this case, I reiterate, the author is the one who chose to make the premise of the book extremely, explicitly politically charged. The author chose to set it in two real, existing political systems. You can't really do that without taking on the responsibility of saying something about our actual world. It seems like McQuiston wanted to have their cake and eat it too. Wanted to write a story that seemed progressive. For example, the book has a very diverse cast of characters, and of course at its core is about diversifying these two systems, but also did not really want to have to address the deep-seated systemic problems within these institutions that facilitate the oppression of the very groups the book aims to champion. In the book, Henry's equerry, his main royal attendant, is this super cool, super hot Indian guy, Sean. Everyone's always talking about how cool and hot he is. And it's like, oh, this guy serving the crown is this awesome Indian guy. That's so cool. Henry, it's so cool that you decided to stay in the monarchy with your Indian servant. I love the British monarchy. They never did anything bad to Indian people. It's stuff like that. You can definitely read this book and enjoy it, but as soon as you start thinking about these things, you kind of can't stop, and suddenly everything feels like a little instance of hypocrisy. Alex's favorite Secret Service member is this badass lesbian trans woman, Amy, who's a former Navy SEAL. That's so cool. Did you know that trans people weren't allowed to serve in the US Armed Forces until 2016, and then got banned again from 2019 to 2021?
Dear Lord, what a sad little life, Jane.
All in all, like I've been saying, none of this means that the book is terrible, and I highly doubt McQuiston had anything but good intentions. It's just difficult to tell a story like this in a completely responsible way. I feel like maybe the best thing the author could have done to avoid stuff like this would be to set the story in the political systems of fictional countries, you know, like a Princess Diaries situation, but I also understand the appeal of having the more relatable, realistic setting. Like, maybe it wouldn't be as fun for some people if it weren't grounded in existing places. I know a lot of people really love this book. I can understand why, and I'm glad so many people have gotten so much out of it. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, but that I think is fair to consider, is the fact that this being a gay romance that got so big is kind of nice in itself. I don't want to discount anyone for whom this book is meaningful representation. Although I do get the sense that the main audience for Red, White, and Royal Blue are probably women. That's a whole media studies can of worms that I've been trying to untangle for a while. Joanna Russ did some interesting writing on the subject back in the day, if you're interested. But ultimately, you know, Casey McQuiston is a queer author. I'm glad to see people elevating queer stories and voices. You know who doesn't elevate anyone's voices? Amazon! Woo! Segway!
She stopped the race like Kirsten. She told me race against you, mate, aye. She stopped the race like Kirsten.
So, the Writers Guild of America and the Screen Actors Guild are currently on strike. This is gradually bringing Hollywood to a standstill. And as I said in my last video, I'm trying to avoid covering media made by struck companies for the duration of the strikes. Solidarity kind of thing. And as I said at the beginning of this video, and have been avoiding for the rest of this video, Red, White, and Royal Blue has indeed now been adapted to the screen, complicating things. But because I'm trying to show a lot of support for the strikes, and said film adaptation comes from our favorite little rascals at Amazon Studios, I thought maybe we could use this as an opportunity to air a little dirty laundry, demonstrate why these strikes are so important. So, Amazon, a company so blatantly evil, this isn't even the first time I've talked about them. Most people are probably aware at this point of Amazon's nasty habit of treating their employees like dirt. When it comes to the Amazon company in general, of course they're infamous for their awful working conditions in their warehouses. Amazon warehouse employees have over the years been subject to constant surveillance, extreme hours, and straight-up unsafe conditions like extreme heat and strenuous physical activity, among other things. OSHA fined Amazon for their unsafe working conditions a couple times just in the last year, but the maximum they can fine them is like $60,000, which, you know, Amazon has $60,000 many times over. They can afford to just keep mistreating workers. And of course, that's not even touching the truly mind-numbing amount of union busting that Amazon does. They are well known for disseminating propaganda to their employees to try to influence them against organizing, as well as sometimes illegally firing or threatening to fire employees who try to unionize. And yes, they did hire the Pinkerton Detective Agency to try to prevent employees in Europe from unionizing. Now, initially I thought that Amazon's history of labor violations was pretty much separate from their film studio, but in fact there have been some interesting developments over at Amazon Studios specifically. Probably their first big controversy was when then studio head Roy Price was forced to step down in 2017 following sexual harassment allegations from producer Issa Hackett. It eventually came out that Amazon had been aware of Hackett's allegations for 2 years and had not taken action to remove Price, which is why Hackett eventually went public. Price was also cozy with Harvey Weinstein and allegedly had a history of making inappropriate comments to female colleagues. But they eventually got rid of him. Great. Good job. Only took you 2 years. Should be smooth sailing from here on out, right? Wrong. Just last year, Amazon Studios had to pay the WGA $4 million in a settlement over underpaid residuals. Residual payments are one of the biggest points of contention for the strikes going on right now. People in the entertainment industry, especially in television, used to be able to live off of residuals. Even if you weren't a very big actor, you could be making decent money off residuals, which you deserved because your work was being syndicated and broadcast over and over again and continuing to make the studio money. But now, in the age of streaming, writers and actors are reportedly receiving extremely low residual payments. Even major actors with principal roles in popular shows and movies are often making an absolute pittance off of streaming residuals. One of the problems is that right now, there's very little transparency from the streamers about how much they're actually making, which makes it easy for them to underpay the talent. And yeah, funnily enough, before anyone even went on strike, Amazon had already gotten in trouble with the WGA for this very practice. It turned out they had been undervaluing license fees for several of their in-house and acquired films. For the record, Netflix also had to pay up after a similar arbitration. But what strikes me, no pun intended, about this particular settlement is that it only applied to 37 screenwriters on 31 of Amazon Studios' films. So it makes me wonder, if that's how much they were screwing over really just a handful of writers on their films, how many other writers and potentially actors are also victims of this wage theft? You'd think there's probably a lot more where that came from. That's speculation, of course. Please, Jeff, don't put me in the contraption for saying all this. I also have to say, in regard to those friends of mine who worked on not just the Red, White, and Royal Blue shoot, but then another high-profile Amazon Studios promo shoot soon after, they didn't get paid for like months. Amazon took so long to pay them. So that's just a little piece of anecdotal evidence that kind of supports the bigger picture. All in all, Amazon is a good case study of why these strikes, and really all union action, is so important. And if you want a direct way to help out, I've put the Entertainment Community Fund in the description again. I intended for this to be like a 10 to 15 minute video. It's probably like a 20 to 40 minute video now. Whatever, it's fine. If you like stuff like this, you should subscribe. Hopefully I'll have another similar work to discuss in this style next year as well. Nicholas Galitzine, I'm manifesting it for both of us.